Hey everybody, I'm Zale and welcome to another episode of Preconceived. Over the past decade, there's been a bit of a reshuffling in the media world. Referred to by many as legacy media, traditional news outlets have been on the decline, whilst people derive more of their news from podcasts, independent outlets, and even just from the people they follow on Twitter and other social media platforms. So why the shift? What is legacy media, and why are people veering away from it? And do the replacement media sources steer us away from the issues of traditional media? I'm joined today by Kim Kierans. Kim is a senior fellow and resident at Massey College, University of Toronto, where she conducts communication workshops for graduate students and produces the JCR, a Massey podcast, a platform for graduate students to share their research and projects through interviews and commentary. Her book, Journalism for the Public Good, the Missioner Award at 50, was published in May 2024 by Bighorn Books, University of Calgary Press. All right, Kim Kierans, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Wonderful to be here, Zale.
So we're going to be talking about legacy media today, and it's a bit of a weird word, legacy media. I wonder if that's a newer term or if that has always been the case, that that's a term, or if it takes time for something to be considered as legacy media. What's this legacy media mean?
I think the term came into vogue with the introduction of the internet and social media. I don't remember it being called that before. And I think it's connected to the destruction and the crumbling of the business model that we talk about with mostly newspapers, but also television and radio. I think when the internet came in, those silos started to crumble. And there is still a desire to find a business model that works to tell stories. And that's what everyone's searching for.
So what is that business model? What was that predicated on when we think about that?
Well, if you think about it, it was a three-tier thing. You had business owners that were investing in a business, a media business. Often when newspapers started, the news was there to fill the spaces between the ads. We're going back to the turn of the when it was 1900-ish. They paid for that, the ads paid, and then the subscription model. So to subscribers to buy the paper because there's value in it. They're learning something new. They're discovering other things. So those two were the main things. And then when the internet came in, and this is actually before the internet, there are studies, I've looked at Statistics Canada data from the industry itself, and the numbers of subscribers and the revenues had already started to drop before the arrival of the internet. So something was going on, and a lot of it had to do with greediness of the media in the business. So, they were getting amazing profits, 18, 20% profits from the advertisers and subscribers, and they weren't serving their clients very well as a business.
So it's interesting because when I initially conceived of this episode, not being a journalist, in my mind, when I think of legacy media, I think of things like the New York Times, I think of things like CNN, but I don't think of them as a business model, which is naive of me because I'm consuming it. I just think of it as kind of the mainstream media. But what you're painting to me is a picture where it's been the mainstream media, but it's been tied to this business model, obviously, that maybe goes above our heads.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about the crisis in news, but really we're talking a lot about the crisis in business. How do you pay for news? News has never paid for itself. Never. It costs money to put reporters in the field. Whether you're a citizen reporter, it's your time or whatever, there is money involved in telling a good story. And so how do you pay for that is the problem. And when the internet came in, the arrogance of the big media was, it's a passing fad. It's going to go away, right?
We're recording this over internet, clearly. But
Exactly. It didn't go away. It grew. And no one had anticipated social media at that point. I remember when social media came in, I thought, what is this? How is it going to affect what I do? It upended everything. And that's a wonderful thing. I'm not against new development. I'm not against progress. I think how we use it's important, and how we serve our audiences is integrity in our business is really important.
So the issue with legacy media, I guess, it sounds like you said they got greedy, which is not a surprise to anybody listening to this because people get greedy a lot, especially in business. What was the quality issue? Was the quality issue that it was becoming prejudiced, biased, by some of the benefactors, or was there another issue that was leading to a diminishment of the quality?
I think that there's always been a certain bias in a publication, in a media. I mean, you go back to the turn of the century in the 1900s. You had the yellow press, where that you had an owner has a certain point of view, and it's going to use that point of view in the editorial pages, but not necessarily in the news pages. So I think it's really important to think about the distinction between what is opinion and analysis versus what is news coverage. And sometimes we're starting to conflate the two as one. So you've got the sense of, there's always been a sense of bias, but news reporters, especially as the industry matured in the 1900s and the early 2000s, started to have certain principles about verification of method. And to keep your own biases out, but to also to be transparent when you have certain points of view. So there is this distinction between opinion and news, and I think it's mushed up. So I mean, I think that the business stopped serving their public. They stopped serving their public. They were not providing the news information what people needed. So they became boring, quite frankly. And it's a shame because their internet swooped in, scooped up all the classified advertisements. So of course they had less money to devote to news if you can't pay for reporters. So as that got drained, there was less service to the people who were reading or watching or whatever. But and we're talking about national media here, but I think the real crisis, we're drowning in information nationally and internationally. We're drowning in information. We're drowning in opinion. The opinion comes not just from legacy media, but it comes from new media as well. But what's the real crisis is, in fact, in your local community. If you're living in, let's say, the Annapolis Valley or in Northern Ontario, when you've just lost your news, Eastern Ontario, Alexandria doesn't have a newspaper. And that's, I think, more of a real crisis that we're facing.
So that's where the business model really has failed us.
Yeah, it really has. So, you've got 347 communities since 2008 who have lost their newspaper or their radio station or their little television station in Canada alone. My data is Canadian data for the most part, because that's what I'm really interested in. And if you translate to those communities, there's been startups. There's been, I think, the 526 startups since then. 400 and some have failed. Wow. So, that's the market. We're talking about the market here. So we've lost, 252 media outlets across Canada. What does that say to you about the service or what happens to communities? I think our ability to talk to one another. There's a lot of studies in the States that have followed what happens when you have a news desert, or as April Lindgren calls it, the news poverty. Communities start to fracture. They have no cohesive thing to read and join. They don't know what's going on at their town council, at the school board, in the health care. They don't know if there's they can't share the good news of winning the hockey tournament, because there's no newspaper to share that, to draw the community together. How do you know when the Lions Club is meeting? All those things that media provided is not happening, and national media doesn't do that, do they? Legacy media or any new startups.
Yeah, because it's too wide an audience, obviously, to have that community impact.
Yeah.
That idea of conflation of news and opinion is really fascinating to me. And as we talk about some of the replacements for legacy media, what I see is on things like Twitter, especially Twitter. That's probably the easiest example. I was speaking to somebody recently and I was just saying, they were kind of laughing that I still watch CNN sometimes. And I said, well, I still watch it. I find it's got its issues, but they said I just get all my news from Twitter. And I was saying, well, how do you know what is opinion basically versus news? I didn't phrase it as coherently as you did, because Twitter is kind of the perfect place where you would get the conflation of the two, where you wouldn't know what's news, where you wouldn't know what's opinion, where anybody can just claim they're a journalist or not even need to claim they're a journalist. But there really is no vetting for the most part of what's coming out of there. So talk to me a little bit about that issue. And I guess to start, when we're talking about newer types of media, what are you talking about? Are you talking about Twitter? Or are you talking about other things?
I think we're talking about newsletters. We're talking about, YouTube is a big source. We're talking about, Twitter. We're talking about Instagram. So, I mean, people where there is no gatekeeper per se, and people are expressing it's the Wild West, as they would say, or an unregulated marketplace where people. So yeah, it's really hard to know what is news and what is not news, and who's a journalist and who's not a journalist. There was a study that came out this morning from the Reuters Institute, the Digital Media Report, and they surveyed Canadians. A polling company surveyed Canadians about their viewing habits and their online news sources, and it's surprising what they came up with. So I was surprised, actually. What are people going to online? Not picking up newspapers or anything. Online. CBC News, then CTV News, then CNN, then Yahoo News, Global News, BBC, MSN, Globe and Mail, and New York Times. That's where they're going. Twitter is not in this. For the majority of people surveyed in January, February of 2025, they're not looking at that. So it's interesting.
Because that's a bit surprising, no?
Yeah, well, it is surprising. It is and it's not, because I think people may go online to Twitter. I don't go. I'm not on Twitter anymore.
Good idea.
I left when I started getting attacked for actually commenting on things. I thought, I don't need this. So the Digital News Report also asked, how do they access the news? We know what they're watching. I just told you that, or what they responded. 40% TV news. Bulletins and programs. I call that news by appointment. Or the other one is, the second is news websites or apps. So the CBC app or the CNN app. So TV, 40% said that's where they're getting their news. 26% said they were getting them from the news sites. 23% said social media. Then this is really interesting and goes to what you're interested in. 4% radio, 3% print, dead trees. Podcasts, 3% are getting their news from podcasts. This is a new category this year that they added. And 1% from chat boxes, like
ChatGPT.
Yeah, and that kind of thing.
Wow.
Isn't that fascinating?
It is fascinating. And I wonder, I'm just thinking, if I were asked that question, sometimes when I'm thinking, I want to get the news, I'll go to CNN.com. That's just kind of my go-to. But I don't go on YouTube a lot, but a lot of people do. I wonder if people are counting when they're just browsing on things, when they're browsing on YouTube, when they're scrolling on social media. They're probably absorbing a lot of news. But do they think of that as, that's where I'm getting my news from?
And do they conflate news and opinion?
Yes.
So we think about... you think about the opinion. A lot of the news sites are opinion, opinion that is an analysis that comes from news. My question is, when we stop having news, when we stop having those top names I named earlier, how are we going to get the opinion? How do we base our opinion? If no one's covering the G7 right now, how are we going to get on CNN, or are we going to talk, even you mentioned the free press in the States. Where are they going to get their material to talk about?
Talk to me about the free press a little bit, because...
So I didn't know about it until you told me. But I went on and took a look at it. I mean, credible journalists, great, and they've decided that they can obviously find a business model by giving an analysis and opinion. I see it as mostly an analysis and opinion website, and it's got a point of view, and that's not a problem. I don't have problems with points of view. They're transparent about it. And that's fine. But for breaking news, I'm not going to go to Free Press. I'm going to go to Free Press if I want to say, well, what do they think about Donald Trump's signing the free trade agreement with the UK? I might go to see what their take is. I may also go to see what the BBC's is as well. But
the reason I brought up the Free Press was because it's an organization I've encountered recently where I get a decent amount of my news from, and it's...
Or do you get news or opinion?
I get very, very good, yeah. So I get opinion.
Or analysis, yeah.
You're right, it is mostly opinion and analysis. And when I get that opinion and analysis, The reason I've enjoyed that is because I do find that they try to show both sides of a story. Granted, I'm sure people feel that they're biased in certain directions, which is
Yeah. I think instead of bias, why don't, Zale, why don't we use point of view?
point of view.
Bias has such negative connotations to it. I mean, it's okay to have a point of view if you're transparent about it.
Is that the difference, though? Because I was going to say, the people who founded the Free Press, they were a couple of disenfranchised journalists. Barry Weiss is one of them, who left the New York Times because they found that it was not transparent, or because they found that it was, they would probably use the word bias. And they left, and they started the Free Press. And I was wondering, what is intrinsically different about that? And I know you're not an expert on the Free Press. You just looked it up because I mentioned it. But with some of these newer news organizations popping up, what is inherently going to make them different? Is it just this pledge, we're going to be more honest? It sounds like it's deeper than that. It sounds like there is a difference in the way they are giving their opinions and in the way they're funded.
Funding. I mean, so that everybody's been funded in some way or another from the beginning. Nobody does news for free. So who are their funders? Are they transparent about who's funding them? Is it a foundation? And I think it's important to be transparent. And that's my concern about some startups or whatever, is that they're not transparent. I don't know where their money's coming from. And I would like to know where their money's coming from, just so I can decide credibility of their info. Are they serving their funders, or are they serving me as a reader?
And I think their funding model is people like me who pay a monthly subscription, which they're proud of. So that does help clarify it, as opposed to a lot of these other news organizations. But as you said there, that's opinion. And one of the pictures you're painting for me, and tell me if I'm misinterpreting this, is that as legacy media kind of declines to an extent and their funding goes down, you mentioned the G7 summit, which is going on right now, for example. This might air in a couple months, but the G7 summit's going on right now. Less funding for some of these legacy media means less journalists able to go out into the field to actually do real reporting on what's going on. And that seems to be like a problem. Is that what I'm hearing to an extent?
I think there's a need for people who go out and cover news events, wildfires, floods, the school board, legislatures, to go out and tell people what is going on in their communities. If we can't fund that, then we have a real fundamental problem with our democracy. How are people going to know running? In communities where there are no newspapers, who's running, what are their platforms? And that's the value of news, news that serves the public. Opinion follows that, it's built on that, it provides different perspectives. And so newspapers have editorial points of view. The Toronto Star is very progressive. The Globe and Mail is kind of business-centric. And so you've got these different points of view, and that's okay to have that. But if we don't have reporters who are out investigating, how will we know about the Greenbelt in Toronto? How would we know about what was going on if we didn't have the Toronto Star and Narwhal working together to provide that story?
So if we need reporters investigating, which seems obvious, but clearly is not obvious, or is an issue that I don't want to say is being overlooked, but is an issue that exists, what's the solution there? Is it acknowledging that the business model kind of doesn't work anymore and trying to invest in new models with more transparency?
We acknowledge that the business model doesn't work a long time ago, quite honestly. And for a long time, the media organizations have been throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping something will stick. And there's all kinds of interesting things going on. I think about Village Media in Ontario. Village Media started off with these small community online publications, and they've grown to many communities, and they've even started their own social media platform when Google said, or Facebook said, we're not going to publish news. They started their new social media platform called Spaces, and that's where they're sharing their news through that way. And I think it's a really new, great idea. In Quebec, there are all these small, tiny media outlets, and they're forming cooperatives together to try and sort of, if you've got 8 newspapers, then you can attract advertising. There's a push to get the government to stop uh, buying ads with Meta and with Google, and buy ads with local media that are taking ad base, that have the revenue model where they're using ads, but spending money at home rather than tech companies. There's all kinds of other things. There's philanthropy. We have a very bad record in Canada of philanthropy foundations. So there could be opportunities there. But I think any model is going to be a mixed model. You think of Tyee in Vancouver. It's got donor, it'll say, we want to cover the election. If you'd like to fund a reporter, please do. And we have a project we want to investigate this. If you want to, please donate. So they do that. They also take, I think, money from unions as well. But they're transparent about it. You know where they stand.
Transparency, you've mentioned that word a couple times, and as you made that distinction between bias and point of view, or maybe a reframing of point of view as bias being more negative, you kind of said a lot of it does come down to transparency. As long as you're being transparent, then we don't have to have that negative slant that it's a bias. It's just a point of view. For the average consumer of media like myself, I find it challenging to know what those biases are, to know what those points of view are, and take that with the problem of conflating facts with opinions. That's where I get really confused because I don't have time to read 5 different sources a day. And some people do. But when you read 5 sources a day, you kind of mitigate some of those different points of view. What's your advice to the average person like me who, A, doesn't really know who's funding what, which is affecting the point of view, and B, trying to parse out actual facts when it's so conflated by opinion?
Well, I guess the thing is what sources you choose. Do you go to sources that are mostly opinion and analysis? Or do you pick 2 sources? One is like a news source, something that is probably a legacy or probably, I don't know, like a new one. You could, if you're a Toronto person and you're interested in Toronto news, you might want to go to, Village Media, or you might want to go to go to something where they're just telling the facts. And then if you have an analysis one, you can go to that. But the other thing is we're really bad. We need really news media literacy. And I don't say media literacy, I say news literacy. What is news? How do you people need to know that? And I think journalists have a responsibility to actually help consumers with that. I think that's really important.
In terms of what a journalist is in this new era of newer media, you've taught journalism, you've been a journalist for many years. Some people are becoming self-declared journalists, so to speak. There was a podcast recently on Joe Rogan, and I was listening to it because I heard it was quite heated, and I was just curious. I don't typically listen to him. But the journalist and historian Douglas Murray was on it, and Joe Rogan had set up a debate with him, and I'd never heard of this guy, but a comedian, Dave Smith, who apparently does a lot of journalistic type work, but he's not a journalist. And the reason I bring that up is because Douglas Murray several times, maybe even somewhat snidely, but several times he mentioned to Dave Smith, he said, the problem is you're not a journalist, so it's basically tough to debate with you. And they were talking about Israel and Gaza. And he said, you haven't been to Gaza, you haven't been to Israel, so it's challenging to debate this with you because you don't actually know what it's like on the ground. The reason I say that is there are a lot of people who learn by themselves now, who put out their own content, and to an extent that's fair. We all use Google. These people aren't even using Google. They're using more scholarly resources. What would your point of view be, though, to somebody who says, I'm okay listening to anybody who seems educated, versus, no, there's real value in a journalism degree, and we need to kind of understand that value before we pick who we're going to get our news from?
Boy, that's a tough one because I think
I'm sorry.
I'm pretty agnostic about this. I think that if someone is curious, it considers other points of view, really searches for the facts and parks their own biases. So I'm not going to search for what confirms my beliefs, but rather be prepared to listen to somebody who has a different point of view and include it in my story. There are certain research skills that journalists have that other people don't. I can find things and I can get different points of view in a lickety split, and I have great research ability. And what I don't know, I say, in my stories. I don't know. Journalism is history on the run. It's not the truth. People talk about this truth in the sky. I mean, stories are developing and developing over time. We present what we know with the facts we have at the time. And if you'll indulge me for just 2 seconds.
I will absolutely indulge you.
What is the purpose of journalism? And if somebody who's going out to cover stories, and I take this from the Elements of Journalism, which is my kind of Bible, it's what news people should know and what the public should expect. And it's Bill Kovach and Tom Rosenstiel. And it's my Bible. But he says, to fulfill this task, journalism's first objective is to the truth. Now, truth is a big fuzzy word, and its loyalty is to citizens, not the employer or not your political leader or whatever. But the essence is the discipline of verification. I mentioned that earlier. Verifying. Is it true? How do you know that? Asking the tough questions, not letting someone just spew, but how do you know that? What evidence do you have? And if somebody is saying something, they ought to be able to defend it. They ought to be able to, say, and also considering what are the other points of view? Are there other points of view out there? And there's a certain independence about a journalist from those that they cover. So I'm not out to advocate for the SPCA and dog shelters. If the dog shelter's not a good dog shelter, I have to be independent from them, and I have to monitor power, not be an element of power. So it's comprehensive and proportional. And the thing is that if someone is not a trained journalist, it's harder. It's harder to do that. And you have to work a lot harder. What do you know? How do you know what's important?
Yeah.
I remember my first newsroom. I had not gone to journalism school. And I remember I was in a small daily newspaper in Amherst, Nova Scotia, and I wrote something and handed it to the editor. And he said, "This is garbage." And I looked at him, and he said, "Where's your lead?" And I said to him, "What's a lead?" He said, "It tells you what the story's about and why people should care." Oh, but I mean, that's how I learned. I learned in the guild system by learning from people with experience who sent me back out because they said, "You don't have enough information. You need to talk to more people, or you need to get more research." And you don't have to have a journalism degree to do that. I mean, there are a lot of good journalists out there who've never gone to journalism school. But you have to have, how do you learn when there's so few people in newsrooms now?
And in terms of Twitter and YouTube, you don't know often who's giving this information. You don't know what their qualifications are. There's also not as much accountability because you can just put a tweet out there, you can put a YouTube video out there, and if somebody says, "Hey, where did you get this from?" Nobody can actually see you, right? Because
No,
you're just behind the
exactly.
screen.
It's really, so I mean, I think that you can learn, there are lots of ways to learn journalism without going to school and paying money. Okay, there's lots of ways to do that. If people want to be writers and be reporters, it's a fire in the belly. And if you've got the fire in the belly, go do it. But do it with integrity. Serve your audience. Monitor power. Be vigilant. Be curious. It's important. What you're doing is really important to our society, to democracy, to making so citizens have an idea of what's going on and how, and they can make informed decisions. And that's what we all want. I mean, journalism's not grand or anything. It's not like history or academia in a sense. It's helping people make informed decisions.
You've spoken a lot and given a lot of great insight about a lot of elements of journalism. The premise for this was the idea of legacy media, and you've explained how that is a business model, really. And that is not what I understood from it initially. I thought that it was just, we lumped all these things together as their older media, but the reason we look at them under that umbrella is because of that business model. I know you're not a forecaster, and I would never hold you to anything, obviously, but what do you see for the future of some of these legacy media companies? Do you view them as, obviously, like you said, for years they've been trying to adapt to differing levels of success. But in 20 years, do you think CNN and Fox and CBC in CTV in Canada, are those going to still be prominent news forces? Or are you, I don't want to say concerned because maybe it's a good thing, but do you feel like they're going to fall by the wayside because of all the issues we've spoken about?
Okay. So when radio was invented, everyone thought, oh, that's the end of print, this 1920s, right? And then when TV came in the 50s, they said, oh, that's the end of radio because TV is here. And then the internet came in and there was, oh, it's the end of TV and radio and everything because, we have the internet and now social media. And what history shows is that those who are supposed to be in the market are there. They will reinvent themselves, that there's always a need for storytelling. We need stories. We need to know what's going on. So there's always the public sphere may change. Businesses will come and businesses will go. They may reinvent themselves. There may no longer be newspapers per se, but they will be there somehow in a virtual way. They may not be called CNN anymore or whatever, but there will be, I do believe that there will be media out there, and credible media, not just this marketplace of everyone screaming at one another. The CNN talk shows or the 24-hour news stuff or Fox. That there still will be credible journalists out there that will be telling stories. And people are working really hard to make that happen. So I am always the optimist in this because I think that history shows that things come and go, but there's always that. It's always there.
Well, that's very wise advice. We tend to be alarmists about everything falling by the wayside. I think that's one message there too.
Yeah.
Kim, to finish on, how do you absorb or consume media? I asked you for a little bit of advice before for the layperson like me, who isn't really sure the credibility of the sources I'm getting. But when you wake up in the morning or throughout the day, what's your routine? And what are some of the habits that you think make you good at consuming the news?
Well, as a former journalist, I was taught to read into the news every morning. You couldn't go to the office until you had read competition, you had read widely and deeply. So so I would spend a good hour of my day. Now I'm retired from news. I'm not going into a newsroom anymore, but I'm still curious about what's going on. So I often will, I will look at the headlines anyway and, scroll through online. I will do it online because in Halifax, we don't get the Globe and Mail or the National Post or the Toronto Star. So it's all online. So I will scan, the Globe and Mail. I'll scan the National Post, the Toronto Star. Locally, the Halifax Examiner, which is a very successful startup. All Nova Scotia, which is a business newsletter, online publication. I'll do the Chronicle Herald, which has been devastated by post media. It's really, there's just not a lot of information there anymore. I'll also take a quick look at New York Times, The Guardian, in England. I will take a peek, usually once a week, at Rebel News to see what it's doing. I'll also take a look at Millennial Post. I'll look at and if something catches me, I'll go deeper into it. But yeah, so I'm just scanning the media environment and trying to get different opinions. And in my TV habits, I'll watch Deutsche Welle on PBS at 5:00, followed by the BBC content, which comes from England. Then PBS News, Global News is where I tend to go. The Global 6:00, their national news is really, I think, one of the best.
So you're watching too and listening to a fair amount of news.
I am. But I'm not obsessive about it. I'm not obsessive. I won't spend my whole day on it or anything like that. But I will read in and in the morning and then at 6:00, just that kind of thing.
I do find that. I've said CNN a couple times. For some reason, it's just easily accessible, so I'll watch CNN a lot. But when I watch something like the BBC or the CBC in Canada, I do find that a lot of the 30-minute segments are really, really helpful in distilling facts. as opposed to a lot of the opinion that you're getting on something like a CNN or a
Absolutely.
Fox. Just those 30-minute segments really seem to focus on those facts, which is helpful because then you can go get the opinion from other places. But if you don't have that baseline, then you're really in trouble because you don't actually know what's going on.
Absolutely. You've hit it exactly how I see it as well. So we are united in that very much. And that's great advice for your listeners.
All right.
Really great advice for your listeners.
Well, Kim, you've given so much great advice. Where can people learn more about you and your latest book, Journalism for the Public Good?
Oh, you can go online and type in Kim Kierans into any search engine, and my book is Journalism for the Public Good, and it's a 50-year history of journalism and the stories, that award-winning stories. And so if you're ever doubting why journalism is important, you've got to read some of these stories because without these stories, they have helped to change policy, public policy, helped the lives of Canadians, brought out issues that we wouldn't know if there weren't people out there asking those questions. And there's the value of journalism. If you're at all, Canadian interested, it's a very Canadian-focused book, though. I highly recommend that you buy it.
Absolutely, and I will put the link to Journalism for the Public Good by Kim Kierans in the episode notes. Kim, thank you so much for joining me and shedding some light on this topic.
Lovely chatting with you, Zale. It's been a real delight.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for listening to another episode of Preconceived. Go read your news or watch it. Have a great day.